Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts. And today on Your Partner in Success Radio, author Richard John Allen is here to discuss his experience of losing his father to cancer and the emotional impact of grief. We all go through it, whether we think we're going to make it through. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It's difficult. And as a best-selling author on grief and loss, he draws from his background in Liverpool, England, to offer insights that help others navigate their own journeys through grief. And he's here to share with us some coping strategies for both adults and children, focusing on healthy ways to express emotions, such as through art and writing. And he will also explore how people can find comfort in signs from loved ones who have passed away. And I wanted to ask him, and I will, we're not just talking in my view about humans, but pets as well. And pets can break our heart. They may not hurt our feelings until they die, and then it's all over. So good morning, Richard, and thank you for sending your book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief with Me, to me. It's on me. I'm sorry, my feet are cold. I'm stuttering. It's in front of me as we speak. But before we get started, can you share with our audience a bit about you and how you like to show up in the world?
Thanks, Denise, and thanks for having me on your show. A little bit about me. Well, as a child growing up, as you say, I'm from Liverpool, England. Obviously, I had a mum and dad, and I have a sister. So there was the four of us growing up. And if anybody knows anything about Liverpool, you'll know it's a working class town. So people there didn't have much money. But as a child growing up, I never really noticed that. My father was a great provider. We had everything that we needed. You know, we felt safe and at home, and we always had a roof over our head and food on our table. And the people of Liverpool are notorious for the sense of humor. So for me personally, I grew up in a funny kind of upbringing. You know, kids at school were always making fun of each other, people in my family making fun of each other. And from outside, I guess people could look at that as being hateful and hurtful and very critical of each other at times and sarcastic, but it wasn't. It was all done in love, and it was all just having a laugh. I think when you've got little money or little wealth, you kind of take it on the chin, and it's like, well, I can still laugh, right? We can still have a sense of humor. So we were just getting on with life, and we didn't really notice that we were going without anything because life was good. So anyway, yeah, I went to an all boys school, and as you probably know, in England, a lot of the schools have uniforms. So you wore your little blazer with your shirt and tie, and it was an all boys school. It was a Catholic school. I went to the school of St. John Bosco, and many of my teachers were priests, and we had nuns that would visit from time to time. In fact, the priests lived at the school. So it was very religious. We went to mass every day. So religion was a big part of my life. And I was an altar boy for many, many years at my local church. And at the age of about 16, I honestly thought I wanted to be a priest. And I spoke to a couple of the nuns that visited the school, and I went off to seminary school, and I quickly returned because I realized I wasn't going to be a priest. It wasn't for me. And I'm 58 years old now, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the exact reason was. All I can tell you is I wasn't going to be a priest. And I came back, to my mum and dad's relief, because I think they were in shock that I told them at the age of 16, hey, Dad, Mum, I'm going to be a priest. But anyway, and I continued to have religion, and, you know, my faith is still strong to this day. But over the years, I found that I didn't feel the need to be in a church or part of a church. I now live in the United States. I live in North Carolina, and I've been here for nearly 24 years. And I've been to church several times here, but just not on a regular basis. I personally feel that church is within us. And whether, you know, you're on a subway train, or you're on a plane, in a car, in your house, in your kitchen, whatever, your church is always with you. That's just my opinion. And for me, my church is in my backyard. I love to sit in the backyard surrounded by nature.
Me too. Underneath my pecan trees, it's my favorite paper person. It's my feet are cold. I'm stuttering. It's my favorite place to go out underneath these giant pecan trees with my dog, barefoot, dig my toes into the ground. Might be, it may be muddy, which it is right now. I don't care. That's where I relax.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's there's something about being with nature, right? And we can get into this a little bit later, I guess, and how nature affects our mood, in a good way and in a bad way, believe it or not. And um, it can lift your spirits. It really can. If you can be at peace. And as you mentioned, I lost my dad to cancer 4 years ago, and that's how I've reconnected with myself. I think through life, it's a constant journey, and we can lose touch with ourselves, with one another, with our family and friends. And it's a way, I believe, in finding that connection again. And sadly, it's not like, oh, I'm going to sit in the backyard for 10 minutes and I'm reconnected and everything's good. It doesn't happen quite that quickly. I mean, it can, but you've just got to have patience. And patience is key to life, I believe. There's not always a quick fix. There's not one fix for all. And when we get into grief, I'll explain in detail some of that. We have to be patient. And that can be the hardest thing, because I think as humans, we can be a little impatient, right? We want that fixed. We want that, answer. We want it, that resolution. And we have to take that step back. We just have to take a deep breath and say, okay, let's see what happens and give it some time here. But anyway, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but that's a little bit about me. Like I say, I've been in the United States for 24 years now, and I was very lucky when I came here. I got a great job. I worked for a major insurance company, one of the biggest in America, for 15 years. I had a phenomenal job. They paid me, as part of my job, to travel America. So I went, to California, Ohio, Florida, you name it. I was all over the country, staying in hotels, and I was giving speeches, and training people, 2-day courses. The insurance company would send me on, and every week I was traveling somewhere. I had a company car, company phone, company credit card, the usual. But I was seeing America, and I was meeting incredible people from all over this country. And I was just truly blessed to have such a job. And it all changed when I lost my dad and COVID happened.
Because I know when we had chatted before, you mentioned COVID. And I have to tell you, you don't sound like you live in North Carolina. You just don't. So I thought I would mention that. I'm in the deep South. We can understand accents, and yours is not from the United States.
Still from Liverpool. I think I still have that accent from
You
Liverpool.
do. You really do. But I love what you're saying about snark. I come from a family. Snark is our second language. And
Mhm.
we're all very sarcastic. We're all very bright. I'm not even trying to be humble about it. We just are. And quick-witted. And honestly, we'll get to picking and poking at each other and we'll laugh so hard that we almost throw up because it can get very funny. I mean, stomach hurting. I mean, and I've lost several siblings. I only have one sister left. And
Right.
yeah, I just lost a very dear friend of mine this week. It was expected, but it hurts.
Hmm.
My best friend lost her stepmother right after this past weekend, right after their holiday gathering. She was driving home and got the text. And we, I think, as we grow older and we hopefully grow a bit wiser, we understand that this is going to happen. We cannot avoid death. We can't avoid losing our pets, our family, our loved ones. But to your point, I think how we cope with it, how we understand it, how we deal with it helps us get through it. Otherwise, you just wallow. And God knows wallowing is not the way to go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but there are going to be those times when you do wallow or you break down, right? I know that. I'm sure people out there know that who are
Yeah.
listening.
You
right? I
have to
mean,
give yourself permission to do that. You really do.
exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm honored to say that John Allen was my dad. He was a phenomenal man. He was like a wise old owl. My dad would only speak when he had something important to say. You know, he was the quiet man in the room, but he was the wise man. And people always went to my dad for help and advice, whether it was emotional or whether it was financial. My dad was always loaning money to friends and family, and they'd willingly pay him back, of course. Um, but he was just so respected in the community. He worked in the local council in Liverpool in the education. He went to the top. He was one of the directors in the town hall, and just very proud to call him my dad. And to this day, I mean, I can be out in the yard cutting the grass, and I'll just break down crying for no apparent reason. I could honestly, Denise, I'm pushing the lawnmower, and I'm thinking, you know, good day, nice weather, and boom, grief just consumes me and I break down. And I love to talk about my dad and share stories about my dad and, you know, the good times and the bad times. And it chokes me. It brings me to tears. And I think we should talk about our loved ones. Don't be afraid. If you cry, there's no harm in that. Let it out. Push through. Keep talking about your loved one. It'll make you feel better on the other side of that conversation that you're having. But not only are you doing it for you, but you're doing it for them too. Just because they're not of this earth right now doesn't mean we should just completely and totally forget them or just keep them within ourselves. We want to hear stories of your loved ones. So please share. I love, I wouldn't say, maybe love is the wrong word, but I want people to share their stories of their loved ones because I can see the love in their eyes. I can hear it in the tone of their voice. And we're all in this together. As you just said before, when we started this conversation, it's going to happen to us all. That day is coming. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and we shouldn't be afraid of that day. And 4 years ago, I can tell you this, I was terrified. When I was holding my dad's hand and he took his last breath, I was terrified. But today, it's a different feeling. And we can get into Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 5 stages of grief, which he talks about. But those stages that you go through right now, today, I'm in that place of acceptance. Now, tomorrow it could be depression or anger, you know, but right now I'm accepting it, and I'm at peace knowing that my dad is alive. I've had signs from my dad. I continue to get them from my dad. So I know he's alive. I know that his life after this body that we have, this flesh and bone, is just a vessel. And once it ages and we leave it, our spirit lives on. It does cross over to
You.
another place.
I agree with you. We are energy, and energy does not die. It just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. But
Yeah.
listen, I wanted to kind of mention because it keeps popping into my head while I'm listening to you. But listen, I have a lot of grief for a lot of people, a lot of pets. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I lost a dog about 4 years ago. She was the best dog in the world. No question about it. She was mowed down by a truck that was
Oh,
speeding through the neighborhood, and she shouldn't have been out there, but she had gotten out and was coming home. And I'm not over it yet. And I will still, this is a God's honest truth, I will hear her tags
mm-hmm.
and her tags and her collar hanging on the foyer, you know, tree in there. I can still hear her. When I get in my car, I turn my head to say, "Hey, how are you doing, Abby Rose?" Because she's there with me. She's in that car in the back seat waiting to go wherever I go. We're not gone. Dog,
Mm-hmm.
cat, dad, mom, we're not gone. And I agree with you. You have to have those moments, and they are moments. You know, you may break down or you may just have, "Aw, my brother was kind of an ass. I miss him." You know, that kind of thing. Because he really was. He was one of the funniest guys. But these are moments. And I've
Exactly.
learned that they're moments. You might as well enjoy it, wallow in it, have a fit about it, do whatever you need to do, but then pull your panties up and go on. And I know that sounds rude, but grief is part of how we process our lives and their lives. And it doesn't have to be a horrible thing.
No, that's right. And like you, I lost a dog 2 years ago. His name was Amadeus, and we had him for 15 years. And like your dog to you, my dog to me was my best friend. And I was crushed when we had to take him to the vets to let him go. It was horrible. And I felt guilty, Denise, because, yeah, oh my gosh, I was crushed when I lost my dad, right? I was there. My dad actually passed away in my old bedroom. So long story short, during COVID, as you know, there was the travel ban and all this, and I managed to get over to Liverpool. Um, my dad, let's back up just real quick. So in February of 2020, my dad sent me a text message from Liverpool, and he said, "Hey son, I've got cancer. I'm riddled with it. I'm gonna die. Oh well." And that was it. I was like, "What?" So I called him up. I wanted to do FaceTime, and he said no because he was so emotional.
Yeah.
And I said, "Dad, there must be something they can do." And he said, "No, I'm going on radiation and chemo to slow it down, but I'm going to die." And then COVID, we flew over, my wife and I, we flew over straight away. Ironically, we counted 15 people wearing masks on the flight going over there, and we thought that's a bit odd. And then we were there for a week with my dad. It was wonderful and it was horrible. And then we came home, and then COVID truly kicked in, in April 2020. So we couldn't go back because of the travel bans and the difficulty of everything going on in the UK and the US. And it wasn't until November when my sister sent me a message and said, "Richard, it's time. You need to come over now because dad's about to go." So I managed to get on a flight over there within 24 hours. And I get to Liverpool. I get to my dad's house. And all this time, Denise, I'm thinking, I'm too late. My dad's probably dead. I'm not going to see him again. I was freaking out. I get to the house. I run upstairs to the bedroom, ran into their mum and dad's bedroom. And I got the shock of my life because he's sitting up in the bed watching a Western. He always wanted to be a cowboy. And he was watching a John Wayne movie.
Oh,
And
John Wayne. Who doesn't love
yeah,
John Wayne?
I know. And I looked at my dad and he looked fantastic. And I was like, "Dad?" And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What the heck?" And I climbed up onto that bed and I gave him such a hug. And I swear, I felt like I was 5 years old. My dad's arms were around me.
Oh,
Um, it just made me feel so safe, and I just wish I'd never let him go. But I was there for about an hour on the bed and we talked, and my mum came in and my sister, and we said, "We're going to go downstairs, Dad, and make a cup of tea," as we do. And it was amazing. And I texted my wife because I came over that time on my own. And I texted my wife. I said, "Alison, he's great. He's going to be here for Christmas," because this was in November 2020. Well, that was on a Saturday morning. The Monday, my dad passed. 2 days later, he
right.
was gone.
That's
And
very common when people
yeah,
they have that, and any hospice nurse will tell you this. All of a sudden your mother or your grandmother is glowing. They look wonderful. They look younger. Their skin is glowing. They're leaving. And the hospice nurse knows this, and she tells you to stick around. Don't go anywhere.
yeah. I mean, at the time I was 54 years old, and I call it luck. I'd never had grief in my life. I'd never lost a loved one like this before. My grandparents died when I was very, very young. So this was all new to me. And, I'm 54 years old. I'm seeing this happen. And you're quite right. The nurse said to me, it was a male nurse, his name was Steve. And he said to me, "It's called a rally. Like the human body they will rally just before they die.
Right.
They'll have this boost of energy, boost of health. And like you said, the glowing.
Yeah, they
And
look lovely. You're like,
yeah,
you're not sick. You lied
yeah,
to
you're gonna
me.
be fine. You're gonna make it. It's incredible. And then boom, they've gone and they've crossed over. And yeah, I was crushed, devastated. Like I said, I was there. My mum, my sister, and her husband and children were there, and we held my dad's hand as he passed, and it was horrendous. But getting back to the pet thing too, when I lost my dog 2 years ago, I can tell you honestly, I cried more, and I felt guilty, Denise, because I thought, why am I so much more in pain for the loss of my dog than my dad? And I felt ashamed. I felt guilty, and
Richard,
then
I do the same. Listen, and
yeah,
here's my thoughts on this because I'm a pet lover.
yeah,
I've got feline office assistants. I've got two of them sitting on the desk listening to us right now. I've got my dog. But when one of them has to go, it breaks me. And I'll tell you why, because they never hurt my feelings. They never
Hmm.
stole the car, took money out of my wallet, ran off, got pregnant. They never hurt me until they left. It's a
Hmm.
very different type of love.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's like
Yes.
our pets depend on us. My dad never did on me, right? Of course he didn't. I depended on him. So you're right. It's a different type of love, and these emotions that we have as human beings, and talking about love here, there are many different types of love. I mean, I love Twizzlers and I love my wife. It's a different type of love, right? That's not the same love. I love Twizzlers
No.
as to my wife. She'd be upset if it was the same. But it's the same with our pets, right? It's a different type of love, and it's a different type of grief when we lose that loved one. And it hurts us so much. Grief hurts so much because of the love we have for that loss of love, that lost loved one that we have, whether it be a cat or a dog or a dad or a mom. I mean, it's so complex. And like I said before, at 54, I'd never had this in my life. And it was like, boom, like a sledgehammer to my heart. And I'm confused. I was just in a daze. It really was a bad dream. I thought, what is this? What's going to happen now? I can't text my dad every week. When I come to England to see my mum and dad, my dad won't be there. Who's going to help my mum? Because my dad was the one who did all the jobs around the house, fixed things, and drove the car everywhere for my mum. And what's going to happen to my mum now? It was a whole complex situation. And God bless my mum, of course, she had her own grief to deal with. Her husband's just gone. She's in that house alone. They've been married 55 years and they've been in that house 50 years. So what was going to happen to my mum? How was she going to cope with this? So there was so much going on at that time in November 2020. And again, during COVID, many of the people out there will relate to this. We could not have the funeral for 3 weeks. There was a delay and you could only have 30 people at the funeral. So that was horrible because my dad could have had thousands of people there. There was hundreds outside the church, but only 30 could go inside. Um, it was just a horrible time for so many reasons. But I tell you, losing a loved one, I think it really is. It gives you this complex emotion, which is grief. And it's up to each of us to get through it, find a way to cope. And we each have to, it is a unique experience. No two people will go through it the same. I can tell you that me and my sister are coping with this differently. My sister actually told me when I was over there in Liverpool earlier this year, she hasn't started to grieve for my dad. 4 years and she hasn't started.
Right.
And she said, Rich, I just can't do it. And she hasn't cried. She
Yeah.
said, I just can't do it. And I don't blame her for that. I'm not going to judge her. That's how we cope. She's going to cope that way. I'm going to cope my way where I cry probably at least once a week. Um, it's just hard
Talking
for me.
about, I lost a brother when he was pretty young. He committed suicide. We knew he would. He
Mhm.
was never going to be long for this life. He was bipolar before he was, we didn't know what it was, but we knew he was not a happy guy. And when I got the phone call, the police called me for some reason. I was so stinking mad. This was many, many years ago. I'm still mad. I have not forgiven him for that, and I have not cried.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I know that's wrong. I know it is, but I'm still pissed off. So,
Yeah.
what are you going
No.
to do? We're going to grieve the way we're going to grieve. But I wanted to talk with you about your book. And you've, shared with us what inspired you to write Keep Calm and Cope with Grief. And I wanted to just kind of go through what's in the book because there are, I
Hmm.
think, 9 chapters, but you start with the reality of losing a loved one, planning funerals and writing obituaries. Those are not fun.
Yeah.
Recognizing signs from deceased loved ones, which we talked a little bit about, and understanding the science behind grief and stress. And then finally, finding healing through religion. Like you, I don't really aspire to be a religious person. I don't agree with much of it, but
Hmm.
spirituality is very, very different. So, I depend on that rather than religion. To me, I'll be honest with you, religion is too much akin to organized crime. I just don't care for it. And
Yeah.
then you talk about resources for support during dark times. So, can you explain some of the coping mechanisms that you discuss in the book, and how can readers identify what works best for them?
Right. Yeah. So my book, this was my first book. I've written 5 now on this journey that I'm going on. So Keep Calm and Cope with Grief was the first one. And it was actually my wife, Alison, who suggested I write a book, which is, it, it was crazy to me. My English is terrible. My spelling and grammar is terrible. But once I lost my dad and we had the funeral in December 15th, we came back to America, we came back home, and she said, Rich, you're good at communicating, you're good at sharing and explaining things. Try writing a book about this and helping other people. So I laughed and toyed with the idea. Anyway, 9 months later, or 10 months later or so, I'd scribbled down some notes, and before you knew it, I had 9 chapters, and I had somebody edit it for me because the grammar again, and then put it out there on Facebook. And the response I received was humbling, to say the least. I was truly shocked by the reviews I was receiving and Facebook comments. And I thought, wow. And here I am 5 books later. And I'm not one of these authors now that, oh, I must write a book. I wait until the book finds me. So when something hits me or I feel I need to share something, then I'll start writing and doodling. I'm in the middle of doodling on my next one because I have something to share. And here I am 5 books later. But the first book, to your point, I never realized this until the other day. Somebody had mentioned to me that Keep Calm and Cope with Grief is like a guidebook. I thought, is it? And he went, yeah. And I look back at the book and I didn't realize what I was doing, Denise, at the time, but it really is. I mean, like I said before, I was 54 years old. I'd never been to a funeral before. And suddenly, I'm the only son. And my sister, asked me, she said, Rich, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. My mum was in a mess, losing my dad, right? And it's like, what do you do? We have to contact the funeral home. A doctor has to come out to certify that my father is deceased, and we get the death certificate. There's all of these steps that you have to go through, and I'd never done this before. I was, we have to organize the funeral. Who do you invite to the funeral? Writing the eulogy, the obituary, talking to the priest at our local church, who can speak at the church, who can speak at the crematorium, because we had a service there too. There was just so many things. And then reading the will. We didn't know what was in my dad's will. There was so many things. And I think you get through all of those steps and the funeral is done. And you suddenly walk back into that house, my mum and dad's house, and you think, oh my gosh, my dad's not here. His jacket and his coat are still on the coat rack. His shoes are still on the floor. His tools are still in the shed. His razor is still in the bathroom cabinet. All of these memories around the house. And they're still there now. My mum hasn't cleaned out the house. They're still there. And I looked at my mum and I thought, oh my gosh, she's got it. I'm coming back to America, but my mum's left with the house. What's she going to do? So for the next, it was like 2 or 3 weeks, I was helping my mum by organizing all of the different accounts. And I think in the book, I do cover this in one of the sections. I actually contacted 27 different companies. It could have been my dad's passport, driver's license, the utilities, water, gas, electric, the cable TV, my dad's cell phone, his pension, his life insurance, all the credit cards or bank accounts he had. I had to go through all of these accounts and either close them or change them from, Mr. and Mrs. just to Mrs. I had to take my dad off the accounts, and I had to organize it in such a way for my mum that it was on one sheet of paper. So if my mum had any problems, all the information was there for her. And it took me a couple of weeks to get it all done. But my mum was so grateful, because once I left and came back home here, she knew that the house was taken care of. The mortgage, everything was being paid. Well, actually, not the mortgage, sorry, because the mortgage was paid, but all the utilities. everything was being taken care of. It was incredible to go through. I just, because I'd never thought about it before. No, the way the book transposed and come to its completion, like you say, it really is a guide to help you through all of this. I do talk about the signs because shortly after my dad passed, I was getting signs from my dad. And it did help me with some of the questions, because like you, with my faith, I was like, I've got a lot of questions now that my dad has gone. Where has my dad gone? Is he okay? Where is he? Will I ever see him again? Will he be able to contact me? Whatever he is, can he make contact with me? And can I make contact with him? I had all of these questions, Denise, and I wanted answers, right? It was really hard to sit back and just think, my dad's gone and that's it. I get on with my life. It was like, no, I want these answers. So I went on this search for those answers. And I believe I found some, and that's throughout all of my books. But in this first book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, I do talk about some of the signs and what they can possibly mean. And I also talk about, like you say, some of the coping mechanisms we touched on before, didn't we, about going into our backyard, being around nature, how it's so soothing and calming. I personally have found that's my church, and that helps me with my grief. And it brings me back to myself, to my connection with God, with the faith that I have, and my dad. But there are many other things you can do. Not only can you go see your doctor, see a counselor or a therapist, you can join a Facebook group. There are so many groups out there where you can talk to other people, even just read their comments. That can help you too. There are so many books out there like mine that can help you through this. But I think one of the biggest things for me too is people. Just being around other people. Don't be alone. It can help you at times just to have that quiet time and be alone. But I personally want to be around other people too. So please don't shut yourself out. Now, you don't have to be around other people, and it's noisy and rowdy. You can just go with your best friend for a cup of coffee, or you can go to your neighbors for a cup of tea, maybe if you have a pet like a dog, you can take your dog for a walk. But
Going to say,
family or
go outside
friends,
with your dog, just
yeah.
spend some time with your pets, whatever they
Mm-hmm.
are. But I'll tell you this thing about pets, and I've had pets all of my life. They know when you're hurting, and I've got
Mm,
a couple of 20-pound gingers. They are 40 pounds on the hoof sitting on my desk. When my friend passed away last week, all of a sudden I found a 20-pound ginger sitting on my chest, butting my chin. He
mm,
knew. He knew. And I
yeah,
just sat there and held him for the longest kind of time.
yeah. It's like so my wife's parents, they were in a retirement home in Georgia, and her dad, lovely man, sweetest guy. We knew it was close to his time, so we drove down there. We took our dog Amadeus. He was about 15 pounds, and we went down there. And my dog loved my wife, Alison, right? But we get down there, we go into her dad's bedroom in the retirement home, and I sit in the chair in the corner of the room, and Alison kneels on the floor next to her dad, who's lying in the bed. And my dog Amadeus went over to Alison and snuggled up on her lap, right neck, as close as he could, pushed up on Alison, and was looking at her dad in the bed. And I managed to take a photograph with my cell phone. Now, my dog has never done that with my wife, never sat on her lap in such a way. But I think, like you said, they know. They know that Alison
No, they
was
do.
sad, lonely, apprehensive about what was going to happen, and that her father was about to pass. And sure enough, 24 hours later, he passed. And it's amazing how animals have that sense. Something happened to me real quick on this story. So a couple of weeks ago, I'm in the house here and I hear thump against the living room window. And I was like, what's that? Thump. It's like, what the heck's that? I go outside and there's two little birds on the floor. They'd hit the windows. I was like, oh, not again. It happens a lot here. We're fortunate. We live in the woods and we live on a lake, so we have a lot of nature around us. Anyway, I pick up these two little birds. I put them in a cardboard box, and this is what one of the local protection of animals groups here told us to do. You put them in a box with air holes in, of course, and you leave them in there for a few hours so they can heal. So I put these two little birds in, I close the lid on the box, and a few hours later, I go back, I open the box. Now, the birds were separate, one was in one corner, one was in the other corner. And when I opened the lid, I got a shock. One of the birds had climbed its way over to the other bird, so they were snuggled up together, and one of them had passed away. One was alive and one was deceased. And I thought, oh my gosh, did that one bird know he was about to die and went over to his friend
The answer is
so they
yes.
could be together? Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but why wouldn't they stay in their own corners and one dies and one does not? But it didn't. The other one went all the way across this fairly large box, and they were huddled up together and then passed away. So you're absolutely right. I think animals and humans, right? We have this gift that a lot of us can tap into, and it can soothe us and help us through these difficult times. That's for sure.
With you. And there are stories, and I can't remember when I read this story about a particular cat that lived in a nursing home for older people. And it was proven that when somebody was going to pass, this cat got in bed with them.
Yeah.
And then within hours, that person was gone. So the staff knew to watch where this cat was spending time, and they knew to call the family or whatever they needed to do. But the cat was, he was there.
Yeah.
And listen, I trust my animals. I live in, what passes for Hurricane Alley. In fact, I bought my home between Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and everybody knows those names.
Mhm.
And honestly, I don't watch the Weather Channel. I watch my dog. My dog is going to tell me what's going on out there and what I need to be concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah. They have that sense, don't they?
They
It's like,
do. They
yep.
really do.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to ask you, in your experience, Richard, what are some common misconceptions about grief that you hope to help people with in your writing? Many of us, and I've come across this before, think, oh, well, it'll pass, it'll pass. It will. And it's going to be different from time to time. But I lost my grandmother, I don't even know how many years ago now. Does she still pop in my head? You bet she does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. Like you said, my grandmother's and grandfather's, I mean, they passed away when I was very young, but I still have distant memories of them. But yeah, there's a song, Hotel California by the Eagles. And I remember that was played on the day of my grandmother's funeral.
Oh,
So every time I hear that song, which is a common song, it reminds me of my grandmother. So yeah, there's many times that those memories pop into my head. But I think maybe one of the misconceptions with grief is that you can get over it. And I honestly believe, like we said before, there's different levels or categories, however you want to describe it, of grief. And there could be a time when it's mild or it feels distant and you're doing okay. And you think, wow, I'm over this now. And then suddenly, boom, it comes back and you're back in denial and you're angry like you talked about your brother before. It it
this
it
was
comes
many
in,
years ago. I am still mad at that
yeah,
little brat.
yeah. I mean,
I
it
mean,
comes,
he did what he had to do. I mean, I'm not taking that
yeah,
away from him. He lived a wretched life. God bless him. But I'm not happy about I'm still
no,
mad at him. And he knows I'm mad. I'll get a little message every once in a while say, hey, calm down. No. And we have a little
yeah,
argument.
yeah.
I'm not
That's it.
calming down, darn it.
Yeah, and maybe that'll change for you, and maybe it won't. I don't. I think one thing I would say about grief, there's no rules. Let's just put it like that. No rules. Two
There
words. No
are.
rules. It'll come and go. It'll be strong. It'll be weak. It'll be hot. It'll be cold. However you want to describe it. And it's different for everybody. So, like I said, there's no rules. It really is, for me anyway, the most complex of emotions. I have people
It
writing to me every
is.
day,
Yeah.
and some of the stories. Oh my gosh! I mean, I lost my dad. I'm there, holding his hand. He took his last breath.
Right, right.
Unbelievable pain for me and my family. Unbelievable. I had one lady write to me only last week, and she said she was the grandmother. So she said, my daughter lost her. Her daughter had passed away, and she lived in an apartment with her daughter, so her grandchild, and nobody knew that she'd passed away. So the grandchild was in the apartment for 4 days until they found the body. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so you lost your daughter and nobody found your daughter for 4 days, and the granddaughter was still in the apartment alone, fending for themselves for 4 days. And
Oh
I'm
my
like, oh my God,
gosh.
I can't imagine what you must be thinking and feeling and going through. And it's just these stories that I receive. I'm like, and they're asking me for help and advice. And I'm like, it's tough. It puts it into perspective. But again, everybody's going through this in so many different ways. Um, like I said, there's just no rules to this, but we have to be patient. There are many ways that we can at least cope. Like we've said, going in the backyard, maybe with your loved one, you used to go fishing, or maybe with your loved one, you used to go to your favorite coffee shop once a week or once a month, or maybe you did some activity together. I would suggest that you still do that activity. Yeah, your loved one's not with you, but you'll probably feel closer to them by doing that same activity, as hard
But
as it
they
might be.
are, right.
Yeah.
And listen, one of the things that I've learned about coping with grief, and as you get older, you're going to have grief. You're not
Hmm.
going to avoid it. But what I have done, and I do it deliberately, Richard, is when
Hmm.
I start to get a little bit ticky about my brother, God bless him,
Yeah.
I will say, okay, hang on, Denise. What are you grateful for? What are the good memories? What are you grateful for? And I will substitute me being a little bit ticked off still with, he was a funny guy. He
Yeah.
really was. And he would tell some stories that just had us, oh my, we couldn't even stand up straight. We were laughing so hard. I
Yeah.
replaced those, I'm mad at him with, aw, that was cute. That was funny. I'm still mad, but, now I'm more grateful.
Yeah. I'm similar with my dad, as I'm sure everybody is with the loved ones, right? I mean, I could tell you stories when, this was in the 70s. My dad would take off his belt and whip me. You know, that's just the way it was. Now, I wasn't physically
Right.
abused or anything, but
No,
that's just the way it was back then. Children today are very lucky. But yeah, that's the way it
I
was.
don't
But
know that they're lucky. I think every once in a while you need to be smacked. I'll be honest
yeah,
with you.
that's
And
true.
I may do the smacking if you don't knock it off.
Yeah, yeah. But I could share a quick story. I remember, April Fool's Day, and this was way back. I was like 18 years old, still living at home at the time, and I had a nice little sports car. It was an old car, but it was a sporty looking car. And I'm in bed, and my dad comes running into my bedroom, and he goes, "Richard, Richard, wake up!" I went, "What, Dad? What?" And he goes, "The bin man or the trash man, he's hit your car." I was like, "What?" Yeah, he was picking up our trash can, and in his big dump truck, he's hit your car. I was like, "No!" And it was my pride and joy. So I jump up, run to the front room, look out the window, and my car's fine. And I'm looking around up and down the street, and there's nothing there. And I turned around, looked at my dad, and my dad goes, "April Fools." And
And
I was
see,
like,
these are memories you can keep
yeah,
forever.
it was so
Yeah,
funny. I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, I can't believe you did that. You got me good, you
he
know?
did.
But yeah,
But you know what I find, and I found it with me and I found it with other people, that it's a common problem, I think, or it's a common issue that people, after enough time has passed, they're feeling guilty because they don't have strong, strong memories. I can't remember what her face looked like. I can't remember
yeah.
the way she sounded when she laughed. That's common, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that could be part of grief affecting you. Your memory bank,
Right,
it's just overwhelmed. So it's like, okay, just take a breath. As they say, unplug it and plug it back in, right? So just take that break and
right.
just relax. And then maybe the next day or the day after, or maybe a week later, the memories will come back. But don't panic. They're in there, they're inside you, they're within you. Or maybe, like I say, there's something that you can do. Maybe there's a movie that you remember. Oh, my dad used to like this movie, and like I know my dad used to love watching The Great Escape with Steve McQueen, one of those World War II movies. So every Christmas I actually watch that movie. He liked the movie Zulu, so I watch that movie every year for him. So there's certain things that I'll do. I enjoy doing it, and it reminds me of my dad. But there's certain things that you could do too, when you've lost a loved one, that'll help with those memories. But there's so many ways that we can find a way to cope. Like I said before, me and my sister are coping differently, and that's fine. We can't judge each other. I'll never forget this, and maybe this is a side little story to share. But the day after my dad passed, I was still in Liverpool with my mum, in the house, and it was late at night, and we were both sitting up watching TV before we went to bed. It was maybe midnight, and me and my mum had a disagreement on something. Let me just put it at that. And my mum looked at me and she goes, "Richard, I've just lost my husband." And I said, "Yeah, but mum, I've just lost my dad." So you can't really, and we hugged each other, at that moment, because we realized, yeah, we can't point fingers and say, well, I'm grieving more than you, so you don't know what I'm going through, and why aren't you grieving like I'm grieving? I don't think it's the time or the place, and I don't think it's right to judge people, how they're coping with the grief. All we
It's a
can do
very
is,
personal process.
yeah, it really
Nobody
is.
can do it for you.
No, you've just got to be there for those people. If you know somebody who's lost a loved one, just be around them, keep an eye on them, check in with them once in a while. Maybe not to talk about the loved one, but just take them to the gym if that's what you used to do, or take them shopping, or just go over, or share some, take them, flowers, a box of cookies, whatever, or just go over there. But just be around them and just keep an eye on them, that that they're going through a difficult time, and that you just want to let them know that you're there for them should they need that help.
It's helpful too sometimes because people forget to eat when they're going through this. You just forget to
Mhm.
eat. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just order some groceries, have Walmart deliver them. You don't
Yep.
even need to knock on the door. Just make sure they've got something that they can quickly eat or might, kind of tempt them. You don't
Mhm.
even need to show up. Just send them some groceries. Sometimes that's all it takes.
That's a great point, Denise. That reminds me. Before I lost my dad, I was going to the gym, and I was putting on the muscle. I was lifting 100-pound dumbbells, which are pretty heavy. You got one in each hand, 100 pounds in each, and I'm pumping away, and I was packing it on. I was like, this, lost my dad, gone. I was done. Couldn't go to the gym. I didn't go for 18 months. And my wife was really worried. I'd lost all this weight and my appetite had gone. And like you said, it affects you emotionally as well as physically, and I had no enthusiasm to pick up the weights and go to the gym. And it took me 18 months to be in a place where I could go back into the gym and start picking up the weights. And to this day, it's still difficult for me to have that motivation like it did before my dad passed. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Go over there with some groceries, and
Right, right.
that can really help.
It
Um,
does, and it's a simple thing. And I
mhm,
have learned, and because people used to do this to me and say, well, how can I help?
yeah.
I don't know. You just draw a blank. The thing to do is just go do something. You don't need to ask questions. You don't need to say, give me a list. Just do
Hmm.
something. It might be, you pick some plums off of your tree and you go hang a bag on their doorknob.
Hmm.
Just little acts of kindness without expecting anything or asking any questions is sometimes the best thing you can do. Richard, we are out of time and I'm so sorry. Before we end this conversation, can you tell our audience where they can connect with you and how do they find your books? And you have a new one coming up too. Tell us about that.
Okay, so the best place to find me is on my website. Real easy. It's just my name. It's richardjohnallen.com. I use John Allen as my author name because that's my dad's name, but John is my middle name anyway. So it's richardjohnallen.com. You'll find all my books on there, links to Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. You'll find my podcasts that I've spoken on, and you'll be able to contact me too. And there's more details about me on the website too. Um, and what I found, Denise, is going back to the start of this conversation, is the proof. What happens when we die? And many people question, where do we go? And they don't know. And I don't know until I get there, right? Till it's my time. But I am looking into this in a big way. So my next book is going to be looking at the physical proof. My last book, which came out earlier this year, called Heavenly Realms, it focuses on heaven, this place that we're supposed to go to, right? Many call heaven. And I look at the different religions, whether it's Hindu, Islam, Catholic, Latter-day Saints, and I look at all the different religions and I break down what they perceive heaven to be. And I also share some of the signs I've had from my dad, incredible signs. I know it's my dad. It blows me away. And I also talk to priests. I've talked to funeral directors, nurses, doctors, vets, and I gather all of this information and I share all of that in my books. But yeah, if you go to richardjohnallen.com, that's where you'll find me.
Thank you for sharing this. Well, listen to our audience. In this episode, we delved into Richard John Allen's insightful book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, and I do have it on my desk. And Richard shared his personal journey of loss and how it inspired him to write this compassionate, very compassionate guide for those navigating the complexities of grief. And we discussed the book's key themes, including effective coping mechanisms, the importance of I can't even talk. My feet are still cold, by the way. The importance of recognizing signs from departed loved ones and the role of faith, whatever your faith is, in healing. And he also highlights common misconceptions about grief and offers, some pretty practical advice for listeners who may feel overwhelmed by their emotions. And his heartfelt insights aim to empower individuals to find their own path. So important. You can't do it for anybody else. They can't do it for you. It's your own path through grief while providing resources for support. So if you or someone you know is struggling with grief, and look, we're in the holiday season, it's going to magnify grief. We encourage you to explore Richard John Allen's Keep Calm and Cope with Grief. It's a valuable resource filled with practical advice and comforting insights. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations on healing and resilience, and share this episode with anyone who might benefit from Richard's wisdom. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks a lot, Denise. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.